Welcome to the Waldorf. This morning we're going to be making basic white bread, 2 loaves of white bread, and my assistant is my grandson Austin, and my name is Kate Ann. And Austin is 8 in grade 3, and he's a good baker, so I've had him come along and help me do the basic white bread recipe. There are some things that are important that go into basic white bread, and the first thing is yeast, of course. And we're using a traditional yeast, a granular yeast. You can buy it in just loose form, or you can buy it in a form of packages like this. This particular package is instant yeast, and something that you should always check if you buy it in packages like this or in a can, you should check the expiry date. And this says, what does that say, Austin? What does that say?
July 2nd, 2021.
July 2nd, 2021. So this is good for a little while, isn't it? Anyway, don't buy things that, if you buy yeast, if it has gone past the expiry date, don't use it. If you're proofing your yeast, which we're going to do in just a minute, make sure that your yeast is active. And at that point, if it's not active, throw it out and start again with good fresh yeast. Because it's not worth, bread making takes about 3 hours, and it's not worth the investment of your time if you're questioning whether the yeast is good or not. So anyway, something else that goes into yeast, into bread, is sugar. Now, there are other sweetening things that you can buy. Do you know what you can use instead of sugar? Any guesses? How about honey? Honey, molasses, maple syrup, anything that has sugar. It's all the same calories, and it all does the same thing. The yeast feeds on this and it grows. So that's why we need sugar. And we also need salt. Salt adds flavor, but it also strengthens when the bread is rising like this and the gluten is working and forming bubbles. The salt strengthens the walls of the bubbles. So your yeast, your bread and your yeast and gluten, everything rise well in it in a solid. Okay. Another thing that we use is shortening. You can add shortening or butter or lard or whatever you want to add. This adds flavor and it adds texture and it gives a nice dimension to your bread. All right. So this is the bread recipe we're using is a bread recipe that I learned 40 years ago. It's called Let's Bake Bread, and it's a 4-H manual, 4-H Ontario, and that's how I really learned to make bread. I learned how to make bread when I was at university, but we only did it one day. So I really learned how to make bread that summer because I baked bread every single week practicing to be able to teach bread making. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to uh, proof our yeast, and the water should be the temperature that you would have for a baby's bottle. Yeast likes to be warm, it likes to not be in the draft, it likes to have food, and it likes to be covered, and it'll grow beautifully. So the first thing we do is the yeast wants a teaspoon of sugar. So Austin, can you sprinkle that in there, please? Sprinkle it around. That's a boy. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. And then we're going to use, what does it say here? How much yeast do we want? It says 1 package of yeast, which would be one of these, or 1 tablespoon of yeast. Now I'm going to hold this so you can get the tablespoon out and you can put that. That's perfect. Thank you. Sprinkle it around. Well done. Thank you. It looks like fish food, doesn't it? Okay, so that's going to proof for 10 minutes. So I'm going to put the timer on for 10 minutes, and we'll come back to that. Okay, and we'll see how well that's growing. The other thing that we're going to add to our bread is milk. And we're going to put this in our milk mixing bowl. There's going to be milk, and there's going to be shortening. Okay, we're going to put that in. This is making 2 loaves of bread. So for every loaf of bread you make, you have a tablespoon of shortening, a teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of sugar. That's an easy way to remember this. So we're making 2 loaves of bread. Austin, would you dig out, please, 2 tablespoons of sugar, please, and just put it in there. That's good. 1. Nice. Okay, thank you. All right. So 2 tablespoons, 2 loaves of bread, 2 tablespoons of shortening, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 1 teaspoon per loaf of bread of salt. Now I'm going to do this, Austin, because I'm always nervous about the salt. So we need 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 for 1 loaf and 1 for the other. And something that I've always done is I always take my salt and put it someplace else on the counter, because you get busy making bread and all of a sudden you think, did I put the salt in or not? So I find if I take it off the work area and put it someplace else, I know that I have used it. So that's just getting old, I guess. So we're going to put this in here, and we're going to let that shortening dissolve and get soft. And in about 10 minutes, we're going to come back and see how that yeast is. All right, the 10-minute timer's gone off, and our yeast is now this big. And it's very healthy, active yeast, and it's liked its nice warm water and sugar. So we're going to stir this yeast down like this, and we're going to put it in the milk and the shortening and the sugar and the salt mixture. Okay. Now this recipe calls for between 5 and 5.5 cups. One other thing I forgot before. There are different liquids that you can use in bread making. Some farm women swear by potato water. You can use milk, you can use buttermilk, you can use just plain water. If you use water in bread, it's going to give you a crust like Italian bread or French bread. Okay, and the holes in the bread, the grain is going to be bigger if you just use water. If you use milk, you're going to have a softer grain of bread. The crust will be soft, and it'll be a more springy kind of bread. So we're using milk today, and this calls for 5 to 5.5 cups of flour. Now, we've measured 4 cups here, and Austin's going to demonstrate how to measure the flour. Um, when you buy flour, it always amazes me that it says it's sifted, and then it comes in this hard bag packed full of flour, and I don't get that sense of it light flour. So that's good. That's okay. Thank you. Well done, Austin. There, maybe use the other side of the knife. There we go. Okay. So this is 4 cups, and Austin's added the 5th. And instead of packing it into the measuring cup, he's sort of ladled it in with this other measuring cup. So we can add this slowly to our liquid. And I'm going to add almost the 5 cups. And this is a little, I don't know, Father Brad called this something special, and I don't know what the name of it is. So if you want to know what the name of this gadget is, go on to the St. Thomas website and leave a message for Father Brad that you want to know what it is. But this is what we're incorporating the flour with, and it's really interesting. I really don't know scientifically what the answer is, why some days you add more flour than the other. It has to do with humidity and the way that the flour and the liquids and the yeast operate. Now that's 5 cups, and I don't think I'm going to be adding much more than 5 cups. Okay, so this is something that you just have to get in there with your hands, and you wait just a minute, and you're going to have lots of chance to do that. I find it easier to actually knead in the last bit of dough rather than try to mix it in. You're going to get to do this, don't you worry. When our children were young, they were in the Catholic school system, and they used to have their first communion in grade 2, and they always used to have me come and make bread with the grade 2s. And I have to tell you that some of the best bread I ever made was when the little hands were really kneading it a lot, because it's not like pastry where the more you knead it, the tougher it gets. With bread, the more you knead it, the softer and uh, smoother and silkier it gets. Just a second, Austin. You're going to have plenty of chance to do this. Um, excuse me. Okay. So when you knead, it's important, and Austin's on a great stool to do this. The force for the strength of the kneading comes from your shoulders. I'm going to stand up on my tippy toes because this counter is a little high for me. And something that I always tell people, when you've got a wooden board, make sure that you put a cloth underneath, because as soon as you start kneading, the board might scoot across the table. So always put a wooden board there. Okay, just a second, Austin. This is called a bread scraper, and it's a really handy thing to have on hand to get the bits and pieces that maybe you don't want to have go into the bread at the moment. So, just a sec. I know you're anxious. I'm just going to get it started. Okay, so you take your bread and you pull it across like this, and you're going to knead with the heel of your hand. Remember? Push and push and push, and then turn it and push and push. Turn it and push. Okay, here. I'm going to move you over. Hang on. There you go. How you doing? Maybe to be fair, I'm going to give him half the dough, so it's not quite a bit. Can I show you something really funny? When I started making bread in Hastings County, when I used to work as home economist, oh, that's nice, Austin. Yeah, it's getting nice. Um, I was teaching farm women how to make bread, which I was very nervous about. And when it got to the kneading part, I hadn't made that much bread and I wasn't sure. And one of the ladies in the crowd said, well, that's all very nice that you do it that way. But she said, I need my bread. I get it like this. You ready for this? Okay. And she says, I go like this. And I go like this. And that's how she needs it. And she says, oh, my children were so naughty today. And she'd go like this. And it was just her way of getting her exercises and her frustration out. And I would bet that maybe during this COVID-19, there might be some banging of bread on the on the table. And it's just a nice way of feeling, getting your emotions out. And it's a really positive way to do that. So I'm going to give you just half, because that's a pretty big wad for your little hands to operate on. And you can go over here and I'll knead beside you. How's that? Okay? And you need this for about 10 minutes, and we're not going to make you suffer through what. Oh, that's much better, right? Is that better for you? Oh, that's good. Good. Okay. Okay. Is that little sister of yours bothering you? Grandma's only teasing. You know that. Yeah, there. Austin's a rugby player, so maybe that's your rugby opponent right there, right? You're needing that. Yeah. Or hockey opponent or rugby opponent. That's right. So you'll probably notice that we didn't use all the 5 cups of flour, but this flour should feel like a baby's thigh. That's what you're looking for, something very soft. And this is lovely dough. This is going to make 2 loaves of bread. And yeah, don't force all of the flour in. If it feels, how does that feel? It's not sticky, it feels wet. Okay, all right, thank you. There's a couple of things that we have to do. Is that we have to grease the bowl, but before Austin does that, um, I've discovered a great thing on my oven called Proof, Proof. And I've discovered that other women have this and have not used it. And it's a great button to push because it holds the oven at exactly 100 degrees. So it's wonderful to rise your dough in the oven under a controlled circumstance. When I used to teach bread making in church halls and in schools, I used to take an electric blanket along with me so that if it was cold and drafty, I just turned the electric blanket on. So, Austin, would you like to show them how to grease that? And do you want me to hold this up like that? Okay, Austin's just using a plastic bag with his hand in it, and he's putting a light coating of uh, Crisco on the inside of the bowl. Is that a good spot for you, dear? Yeah. Okay, I think that's good. Here, let me have that bag. We'll get rid of that bag. And could you put the dough in there and give it a press? Press it down. Just press it gently down. Press it. Now, okay. And now I want you to flip it over. No, just the dough. Take the dough out and flip it over. Can you peel it away and flip it all the way over like that? Okay. Now, the reason we do that is so that the dough gets a light coating of Crisco all over it so it doesn't dry out when it's rising. And we're going to put this in the oven. I have this set of bowls, which is very handy. I just clip this on the top. If you have plastic wrap and tea towel, you can put this in your oven or in a warm spot. I've even been known to rise bread in warm cars in the summer. It comes up very fast. So I forgot to mention before, how's that flour tasting there, Austin? Tell the camera what we're going to make out of one of the loaves of bread.
A brachiosaurus.
When my grandchildren come, they choose different things to make bread out of bread, and we're doing a dinosaur today. And sometimes we've done farm tractors, and sometimes we've done dogs and cats and snowmen and trains. Yeah, we've had all sorts of things that we've made out of bread. So it's a great activity to do with your grandchildren. So we're back after an hour and a half of rising, and this bread has doubled beautifully. It's actually a little bit more. A test to see whether your bread has doubled or not. And Austin, I'm going to have you do this. I want you to take your two fingers and gently just put them in. Okay, well, that's fine. So if your two fingers have made the impression and stayed, that means your bread's ready. Now you get to punch that down because I know how you like to do that. Okay? Yeah, sure. Okay, keep doing it. This is what you need an 8-year-old boy
all
for.
The air out.
That's right. That's what it's doing. Yeah.
That's right. Here, look.
There you go. All right. Okay, let's see how that looks. That looks perfect. Okay, so what we've done is we've caused the action of the yeast to just be exhausted and relax. Okay, so one of the things you have to do is just let this rest for a minute. Now, I'm sure all of you have shot an elastic at someone, maybe a cranky brother or a sister, and you've shot an elastic and you go, pew. So what's happened is when Austin punched this down, what's happened is that the elastic has come back and it's very elastic right now. It's very difficult to actually roll this into shape, and I'll show you how this happens. Can you just back your hands up for a minute? This makes 2 loaves of bread, and I really like to use my scale. Just a minute, just a sec, hang on. Each loaf of bread, okay, oops, daisy, careful, sorry about that, Austin. What was that? 600? Okay, this is smaller, I can tell.
Just about 600.
Oh, they're both about 600. Perfect. They're both the right size. Okay, so it's equal size. You can maybe not do that. Okay, let's put one over there, and we're going to put one here. Okay, so this is the loaf of bread that it goes in. And most of my bread weighs between 500 and 600 grams. So that equals a loaf of bread. So we kind of stretch this out. And I'm going to have you roll. If you do that, can you roll it just gently? Are you sliding on the stool? You are. Okay. Just roll it. And what you're trying to do is get rid of some of those air. Listen. Can you hear it? What's that squeaking? Okay. Those are the air bubbles getting out. Okay. Sometimes when you make a loaf of bread, it has this huge air pocket. Oh, okay. Just a sec. Yep. Okay. All right. So let's look at this. That's probably pretty good, Austin. Okay, there. Okay, so we want this to kind of be the shape of the length of the pan, right? So we're going to roll this up and put this right here. You, like me, we're going to roll it like a sleeping bag. Okay, can we do that? There we go. Okay, and then we're going to fold the ends in like this, and we're going to put it in there, and it should be a perfect shape for that size of pan. Now, Austin wants to make a, what's this called?
Brachiosaurus.
A brachiosaurus. So we're going to take a minute and we're going to try and use about half of this dough to make Austin's dinosaur. When the grandkids come, we try to make different things, and this is what Austin's chosen to do now. So any extra dough we're going to put in these little tiny pans, and we'll be right back. So here we are with Austin's
Brachiosaurus.
And the easiest way we found to do this design was to draw it on paper, and then we've cut this out of scissors. So Austin, can you gently, can't keep pulling that off, and I'll just try to ease it off. And hopefully, and Austin, what can you tell the people about when it starts to rise? Does it always look like what it's supposed to?
No. No, it does not.
But it kind of looks like it. I mean, right now we're looking like it. I think it's looking quite good. You can do whatever you want with that, buddy. There we go. It's got to fit on the pan though, remember? Okay. So I think that's a pretty good, what's it called? I love you, Austin. Anyway, we'll see how it rises because it will rise, it'll double. And then when it gets in the oven, it expands more. But the kids have fun doing their designs. And you don't need anything fancy cookie cutters. You can cut it with a pair of scissors like we did. So, okay. Well, you think about it. These are going to go in these little pans. And they make really cute loaves of bread. Kids love them. They make really cute miniature grilled cheese sandwiches because they're miniature. What do you want to make?
I'm thinking.
Oh, are you? Okay. I've got to get this guy transferred before he starts to rise. So what we've done is we've transferred his dinosaur onto a cookie sheet. And this is something you should do right away before it starts to rise because he's really tricky to move once they start to rise. And these are these little tiny pans that I have that make about, I think 6 of them make 1 loaf of bread. And they're really fun because for the young kids, when they rise up, it makes a really miniature loaf of bread, and it's really fun to make grilled cheese sandwiches out of little mini loaves of bread. So here we go. Okay, so this is our dinosaur and a skull and a cookie. So this is what Austin put together. This was cut out by scissors. And then we have a loaf of bread, which is a pound of the dough, and 2 little loaves that we're going to put in. The second rising does not take as long as the first rising, so pay attention to your rising. You don't want this bread to get more than an inch, 2.5 centimeters above the pan. Okay, and it's getting fairly close to that. And I have preheated my oven, so I'm anxiously waiting for it to get to 375. This cooks for 26 minutes at 375, and it's a perfect loaf of bread. If you allow your bread to get to rise higher than this, what happens is that your loaf of bread will lose a sense of flavor and taste. It's called over-risen bread. And there's nothing much you can do with it if it gets ahead of you here. You can't punch it down at this stage and start the dough process from rising again. So keep your eye on that and make sure you get it in the oven at 375 when it's about an inch above the pan. What's going to happen when it gets in the oven is that a thing occurs called oven spring. And if you sit closely in front of your oven and watch it with the light on, that bread will rise up. It'll just go like this. And it rises to a point where all the molecules of dough get to a certain temperature. They're all the same temperature. It's called oven spring. And it just goes, and it rises to that point. And that happens in the first 10 minutes that you put it in the oven. If your oven is too hot, And I always recommend that people have an oven thermometer. Here we go. This is an oven thermometer. And I recommend that everyone buys one for their house because I have two ovens and each oven is a little bit different. When you're baking cookies, especially, it's very important to have exact temperature. Bread, you can be off just a tiny bit, but not much. Um, if your oven is what I say too slow, that oven spring happens very slowly and you end up with a loaf of bread that's kind of flopping over the edge of your bread pan. That's not what you want. I mean, it still tastes wonderful, but if it was judging at a fair, they would judge that as an oven that was too slow. If your oven spring happens quickly, it goes whoop, and you end up with a small loaf of bread that's dark, it means your oven is too hot, that oven spring has taken too much, it happened too quickly. Okay, so those are things you can look for. But do buy yourself an oven thermometer and check your ovens regularly because they do vary. And when I do cooking or bread workshops in halls, I always try to have an oven thermometer with me because most halls ovens are quite different. So, okay. So thank you for coming to the Waldorf. We've made a great dinosaur and some small loaves of bread and a large loaf of bread. And what do you have to say about that, Austin?
That was easy.
Think of your bread.
This bread is awesome. It tastes so good.